Welcome to Breaking the Line, the ECNL podcast, a bi-weekly look at all things ECNL, covering topics that you care about and topics that make a difference. As always, leading the discussion today is ECNL President and CEO Christian Labers, ECNL Vice President and Chief of Staff Doug Bracken, and Ashley Willis, ECNL's Partnership Activation and Alumni Relations Manager. Today's show will also include an introduction to the now full-time videographer for the ECNL, Mr. Reed Sellers. And after a record-setting show 2 weeks ago, Christian Labers, what will we hit today?
A wide-ranging discussion on positions and developments and profiling.
Great topics and a lively debate on all of the issues, capped off with Doug Bracken's Brainbuster. And we get things started after this message from ECNL corporate partner, Nike.
Nike is a proud sponsor of ECNL. Nothing can stop what we can do together to bring positive change to our communities. You can't stop sport because hashtag you can't stop our voices. Follow Nike on Instagram, Facebook, and Twitter.
Welcome back to Breaking the Line, the ECNL podcast. I am Dean Linke. You just heard me break down today's topics. So to kick things started, I turn it back over to Christian Labers.
Thank you very much, Dean. And here we are again, same group, Mr. Bracken, Miss Willis. Good to see you guys.
Hello, Christian.
Got a great blue shirt on today. It's very blue.
Thank you. I like blue.
This is a podcast, Ashley, so we probably shouldn't talk about colors people are wearing because then people can't actually see it.
Not if Reed's going to do video marketing for us.
It's fair.
Yeah, we have a special guest here. I don't know how much he's going to say today, but Reed, new videographer for the league. Welcome to the league. Been working with the league for a long time on a part-time basis, but now you are here full-time, and you didn't expect that you would be called on this podcast, but we're going to put you on the spot anyway and say welcome to the ECNL full-time.
Awesome. Thank you. Yeah, no, I'm super excited. I love it. Past 2 or 3 years have been great. Happy to be here on the podcast for the first time and look forward to it coming up.
A lot of the cool video stuff that people have seen in the league over the last couple of years, not all of it, but a lot of it's been done by Mr. Reed. So now you've heard the voice behind the camera.
Very cool. Well done, Reed.
Thank you.
So last week, approaching one of our biggest, if not the biggest listener tally ever, which is awesome, tells us that we're getting more and more topics, I think, that people are interested in, and we want to do that and talk about things that matter. And one of the things we talked about last week was some of the misconceptions and some of the theory or thought behind multi-sport and specialized athletes and age groups, that matters or doesn't matter, or good and bad, because it's, as in most things interesting, there's no right or wrong answer. There's areas of gray and continuums. And today we're going to sort of expand on that, specifically within the sport of soccer, in talking about, for lack of a better word, specialization, or specializing position versus playing multiple positions, or the versatile player, profiles of positions, how positions and profiles may change over time based on the age of the player. So, Ashley, where do you want to start on that?
What is your guys' stance on players having multiple positions in the youth game? Should they only have one position that they are very good at, 2, 3, 4, 11?
I'll jump in because my view of this has changed, I think, over the years of coaching. Again, recognizing that there is no absolute answer, because you're always going to have players that are versatile or maybe a little bit of a jack of all trades. As Christian knows, I'm a fan of my hometown team of FC Cincinnati, and they have a player named Yuya Kubo. And Yuya Kubo has literally played every position except goalkeeper, and that's at the professional level. So it does happen.
We got to say to every parent listening to this podcast, do not expect to be Yuya Kubo.
Well, yes, hold on.
10 positions.
Now I'm going to answer, because I think if you want to be good at something, you have to practice it. And there are very different and unique skills that are required of a center back versus a forward. And you can name all the positions, and they have very unique skill sets and very unique requirements. To me, in order to be a very good, high level, even a professional player, working on a position and understanding the nuance and the craft that goes into playing that position, I think is really important. So I think this idea that in order to develop or be a good soccer player, you have to play all these different positions and have all these things. I would argue I don't believe in that. I think that specializing and understanding a position is important if you want to be good at it, because all of them have very unique things that you have to do to be successful.
I'm going to steal somebody's line and say not so fast,
Okay.
because I think you'd agree with me, because you're talking about an older player in that example and context. And I would say that if you look at a soccer player, there are some core skills: passing, receiving, dribbling, heading, striking, that are required in every position. Then there are the more specialized skills, or the skills that you do way more frequently in some positions than others. So, for example, a center back is going to need to be probably better in the air and winning air contests and air challenges and heading than an outside midfielder, just if we're going to speak generally. But in order to be a good center back at any level, or a good right midfielder at any level, you generally have to be able to pass, receive, dribble, and strike the ball to a minimum level of quality. Would you agree with that?
Yeah.
Yeah.
If you go take this all the way down to the young parent, the first time parent of a young player, U8, U10, whatever, I think there can be way too much focus on what is the position that my kid is playing. And by the way, they always want to be center midfield or center forward. Nobody says, I can't wait for my kid to be a center back for some reason, which is really unfair to center backs. But at your average 8 or 9-year-old parent, I think you would agree, tell me if I'm wrong, that focusing on which position and being a specialist in a position at that age is not appropriate.
I don't think it's not appropriate. It could be appropriate. I think you can acquire the skills and the things you're talking about, striking, receiving, and still start to understand and start to learn the specifics of a certain position. I think what I've probably been faced with more is the desire for the kids. Oh, they should be playing. My kid needs to play every position. They need to play a lot of positions. And I don't agree with that.
I agree with that.
Yeah, I think that you can do what you're talking about. Now, I think this is a very complicated question, because I think there are also certain characteristics that you might see in a kid early on that might lend you to say this player would be, and we'll talk about this, I'm sure, in player profiles, but this player would be a really good this, and that may make you invest in that player in that position. There may be some players who that evolves over time. There's not a blanket right or wrong, but I don't necessarily think that you can't do it and still acquire the skills that you were talking about generally that you need to be successful.
Yeah, okay. So there's the extremes of the continuum, and then there's in the middle. So I think we would say, you tell me true or false, and actually you weigh in on this. You're 8 years old. You should not play in goal the entire game, every game at age 8, and expect that you're going to end up being a successful soccer player or goalkeeper. True or false?
I agree that you shouldn't, but I don't think it means that you wouldn't be successful if you did. Depends on the training environment and what you're doing, what the training environment is with your goalkeepers.
I would probably have to agree with Doug for the most part on that. I don't think playing in goal at 8 means you're going to be a good or bad field player.
I think if you look at the majority of goalkeepers, and this is totally subjective, so again, we're open to fact checking. We don't have any moderators here to fact check one of us and not the other. But if we were going to talk about it, most successful goalkeepers at the highest level, or at least maybe I shouldn't say most, a majority seem to have specialized in goal later than earlier.
True.
Ooh, I don't know. Maybe.
Don't we have one goalkeeper on the men's team who didn't play until senior year? Didn't into college?
Well, that's the opposite of specialization. Not playing would be, not special.
No, I don't think he played goalkeeper. I think he played on the field.
I don't think he played.
I think he started the sport.
It just not played. Well, okay. Well, then
we're talking about Matt Turner, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, Matt Turner. Yeah.
Yeah, he came to the sport late, right?
Yeah. I mean, Hope.
But then you have the Christian example of Hope Sola, who was a field player, a very dominant field player.
Yeah.
Who then became a goalkeeper, and then obviously rose to prominence as a goalkeeper. I don't think one size fits all. I think if you have a kid whose skills and mentality and desires relate to goalkeeping. So I think this is a tough one to use as an example. And in the training environment, did you provide the necessary acquisition of skill to understand that in the modern game, we're going to try to play the ball back to your feet and we're going to ask you to give it back to us in a useful way? I think you can do that in training and still have that player playing goal in the game to gain their game experience as a goalkeeper. That's possible.
But would you put that player in goal every minute of every game at age 8?
I would not do that, but I'm not saying that it's not possible. Maybe that kid, that's what they want to do. That's also part of it. I don't think it's impossible for them to be highly successful by starting to specialize in goal early if I have the right training environment. Generally, do I do it, or do we see kids that are 8 years old that are like, oh my God, I want to be a goalkeeper? No, not generally.
I'll make another statement here. You could say true or false or react. Which position you play, let's go on the field now. Which position you play and whether you play one or many as a young player has any impact on your long-term development. So if you're a young player, whether you play one position predominantly or whether you play 5 different positions at an equal basis has an impact on your long-term development.
100% yes, it does.
In what ways?
Because again, as I said at the beginning, I think there are things that you do in certain positions, in all the positions, that are very unique to those positions. And acquiring a greater understanding of those and having the opportunity to practice those on a more regular basis in game like situations would lead me to believe that you have a better chance of developing at a higher level than perhaps someone who is playing 5 different positions and may not necessarily be able to acquire all the understanding and nuance that a certain position requires.
At what age would you say then that if I am a 9-year-old, I should start being a 9-year-old right-sided center back versus a 9-year-old functional player in technical and tactical understanding generally?
I don't know if it's 9, but it could be. Again, I think it's down to the profile and the characteristics of that player. And maybe they're not yet defined enough to put them in that situation, but maybe they are.
I think when you're playing on a 7v7 or a 9v9 field, you should be playing like as many positions as possible for the most part, because when you change to U13, 11v11 size field, it's completely different in many ways as far as like position specific.
Ooh, you think so?
Yeah.
I think positionally, if you're coaching and you have something cohesive, let's say you, Ashley, being the brilliant coach and tactician that you are, you start a team at the lowest level, whatever, 5v5. The positional understanding and play translates throughout to 7v7 to 9v9 to 11v11. The game it should.
Yeah.
Shouldn't it?
Yeah, but I'm saying like
if the game looks the same.
If you play if you play a left back, a 6, and a striker as a 9-year-old, I don't think that's going to hinder your development when you go to an 11v11 field, because how you play an outside back, a 6 or a 9 as a 9-year-old is going to look different than when you're on a bigger field. Now you have more positions. Now there's like actual like true formations and tactics more or less going into play.
Totally disagree with you.
Okay.
I think there's a translation between the two. The space is different. It's bigger space, so you have to cover more space. You're right. There are more players on the field, but the form and function of your team and your structure and probably your game model, right, and your principles,
right,
it might get a little bit more complex, but I think the game looks the same. It should look the same.
Yeah, I think there's like it all flows together, and like you go from like you grow within the game and the principles grow as well. But I think Christian's question was, does it hinder your development? I don't think hindering your like playing multiple positions at a 9v9 was going to hinder your development into an 11v11 field.
I thought he asked if it would help
Now, I think the question is just your opinion on that, because I know we have people listening to this podcast who are going to have a very, very strong opinion one way or the other, and it may not be right. What this discussion so far has indicated is there's a lot of gray area here, because if I tried to summarize what we're talking about here, I would say being an 8-year-old and saying you're a right-sided center back and that's all you're going to play and you're going to specialize as a right-sided center back starting at age 8, because I play in a 2-3-1 that's going to eventually turn into a 4-3-3. Those would be systems that would have similar relationships. I would say that is not a great thing. I would think that that 8-year-old would lose some context of decision-making and understanding by always being, for example, behind the ball and always looking at the game from deep. That
would it help their decision-making from that position? Because
well, you could also say that it'll help their decision-making by playing in front of the ball as a midfielder or a forward and understanding what type of passes and angles are good for the forwards and midfielder to get into, or what type of passes are helpful to that player or spaces to occupy, that then you can take that knowledge into decision-making as a right-sided center back. So I would say pigeonholing too young in one position risks a more natural understanding of the whole. But I understand your point, Doug, because there's no such thing as the world-class versatile player, okay? Because you're world-class at something. You're not world-class at everything. I mean, and that doesn't mean that there's not value to the versatile player who can play in multiple positions, because there is, because that player, usually the stories about the value of that player come when there's injuries or there's problems and you need to have a quick solution. It's not because, man, I can't wait to have the most versatile players ever, because if I can get the best right back, the best center midfielder, the best center forward, that's what I want to do. I don't want to have the 5th best at all of those who can play in all of those. So somewhere along the development path, you have to become an expert at a position, because that's going to differentiate you. But the question is, where does general learning and understanding of principles start to turn into specific learning and understanding of principles and actions of a position that's generally tied to a certain type of receiving the ball, certain types of spaces you play in, and certain types of relationships that demand certain types of techniques. Do you agree with that?
Starting that process earlier,
I think it's an evolution.
Hinders their development.
I don't know if there's a way to actually answer it directly or not, but if I had to err on one side or the other, I would err on providing a little bit more variety instead of less at the younger age groups. That's my personal opinion.
That's probably how I've done it. But I do think a lot about the idea of identifying players and their characteristics earlier in the process. I'm not going to say it's 8 or 9.
Yeah.
And then trying to help them understand the nuance and the specifics of that.
Your point, I think, if I hear you right, and I agree with it, is that there is real value to being an expert in a position, and that the more you play a position, the better you're going to be at it, especially if you're intentional, than if you don't. Ashley, right. Any different interpretation on that?
No, I agree. I just think like if you're a really good 6 as a 9-year-old doesn't necessarily translate to being a very good 6 as a U15 player. And so like playing multiple positions at a younger age has its value.
I agree with you. I'm going to push also and say, just because you're a good 6 at 15 doesn't mean you're going to be a good 6 at 19.
100%.
I think that is true all along the continuum of development.
We can zoom that out and say just because you're good at 9 doesn't mean you're going to be good at 15 either. So right. Positions can be just a smaller circle within the Venn diagram here.
There's a natural transition to what we call profiling for players, as we profile their best attributes and how that might fit for them immediately and down the road. Christian, Ashley, Doug, and even Reed will have a solid debate on profiling after this message.
Soccer.com is proud to partner with the ECNL to support the continued development of soccer in the U.S. at the highest levels. We've been delivering quality soccer equipment and apparel to players, fans, and coaches since 1984. Living and breathing the beautiful game ourselves, our goal at Soccer.com is to inspire you to play better, cheer louder, and have more fun. Visit Soccer.com today to check out our unmatched selection of gear, expert advice, and stories of greatness at every level of the game.
Welcome back to segment 2 of this week's edition of Breaking the Line, the ECNL podcast, where Christian Labors now pivots to profiling and creating profiles for each and every player on your team and how that breaks down the technical, tactical aspects of it, and so much more. So to get things started, once again, I turn it over to the president and CEO of the ECNL, Christian Labors.
Some people may understand this better than others, but the concept of a profile is that every position has a set of attributes that make you more likely to be successful in that position, or that position demands more so than other positions. That profile is technical, physical, tactical, mental, or emotional. And I think those things may change over time in terms of what profile a player fits, for example, because if you develop early and have certain physical attributes that are really far above your peers at a young age, but then diminish over time, that may impact the position that's best for you. Then also some may be present early and stay. So I'd be curious your response to this. There are kids on an early basis that gravitate to the back or gravitate to the front. The kids that want to score goals and be one-on-one and creative, selfish, some may use that word, but they just want to go and they want to dribble and they want to score. And some kids that want to sit back and sort of see the game and organize and are content to be a little bit more defensive. I think you see mental traits or mental perspectives early. Would you agree with that?
I think you can. I think it's always incumbent upon us as coaches, and I say this all the time to our coaches, is first of all, what is the timeline of our responsibility for a player? And that is their youth career, right? So in theory, you are ideally going to have a player at their peak as a youth player when they're 19, 18, right? When they're leaving you. That's the hope. And so I think it's really important that we all can look at players for not only what they are, but what they can be, because that's our responsibility. Yes, some things can really appear in players early, whether that be emotional maturity, leadership, speed, strength, or certain abilities technically and tactically that lend themselves to certain positions. And I think the real art in this, and I do think it's an art, is being able to recognize those things and get that player in a place where they can be most successful and teach them the things that they need to know in order to do those things, to perform that position at a high level. I think it's really important that we look at players and young players not just for what they are, but what they can be. And then you make somewhat of an investment in that. Doesn't mean you can't change, or something happens and you pivot or whatever. But I think in a lot of these instances, you're making an investment in what you think a player can be, and you're trying to cultivate the things that are important to you in a player that plays that position. Do you agree with that, or is that too idealistic?
I think I look at it, and I'll use an example or an analogy. It's not intended to be as probably direct as it sounds, but is sculpting. At an early age, you're trying to teach general things and general principles, and every kid is kind of similar in the sense that they're not strong, they're not powerful, they're not technically hugely differentiated. The younger you go, obviously. Then as a kid grows and develops, and what strikes me in this, and this has been true in a lot of other topics we talk about, it's so individual, right? Because kids mature at different times and rates, they improve at different times and rates. But as the player develops and shows more of maybe some internal characteristics that will lend themselves to moving into different profiles or different strengths and weaknesses. For some kids, it might be younger than others, but it also begs the question of how do you nurture the special attributes and talents that may appear at different times throughout as well, because a player that has a really confident, risk-taking 1v1 mentality needs to be probably coached and managed differently than a player that doesn't have that mentality. One is not better than the other. They are different. Because, for example, if you put a risk-taking 1v1, I want the ball and I want to dribble player at center back, you're probably not going to have a very good center back. And if you put a organizing, risk-averse, solid decision, possession-oriented player as a number 9, you're probably not going to score very many goals, right? So to me, to your point, it's looking at where is the player now? What are the sort of general needs? And as the specific needs, positive, negative, strengths, weaknesses start to appear, how do you manage that over time? Because I think the goal would be at age 18, maybe a little bit earlier, you have a player that is in the position that maximizes the strengths that they have that are inherent and minimizes the weaknesses they have, so they have the best chance to be successful long-term in the 11-a-side game.
Yeah, I mean, it would be irresponsible, I think, as a coach to try to take away or not encourage and cultivate what we all call superpowers or super strengths that players have. I think that's also part of our responsibility. What do these players do really, really well? And what makes them different or special? And how do we lean into that or have them lean into that? That's part of our responsibility as a coach for sure. We all will see the game in a different way. And maybe we all think that we don't all think a center back necessarily has to play the same way, right? Some people might think differently than you or I think. It's important to know what you want and what you think that player needs to be able to do to be successful, and be very intentional about how you teach the player those things. But I do agree with you about those super kind of strengths of players and that we lean into them. And some of them absolutely will relate to certain positions more than others.
Let's put it in context. Ashley, what positions can you give us, like the 20,000 foot view of Ashley's soccer career from youth to college and positions in respect to this discussion? Were you a player who played one position the whole way? Did you move around? Where and when did it change?
I played like the wing, the left wing. I'm left footed. I played left wing until sophomore, junior year of high school. And for the very first time, Jay Howell threw me at left back. And then I left that team mid-season of that year, and I was a striker. And then in college and preseason, I was converted to a left back, and I was a left back, starting left back all 4 years of college.
So you were a wide player predominantly. Yeah, sometimes in the back, sometimes in the front. Now, a couple of interesting things to that, right? First of all, being left-footed, which is, I think, a blessing for a soccer player because there's not a lot of left-footed players. Right. And so when we go back to the profile, there's a lot of people, and again, you can create a profile to match the way you want to play. Okay, so there's going to be different profiles based on your vision of the game. But generally, if I'm going to speak generally, a left-footed left back is a highly desirable player more than a right-footed left back, because the left-footed left back naturally opens up to the left down the line and can play balls that are less risky than the right-footed left back, who always cuts inside onto their dominant foot and looks to play into, in theory, tighter central spaces, because they don't want to go out to the left side. Similarly, if you go that into the attacking third, you can discuss the difference between inverted wingers and not. But a left-footed player gets to the end line with more probably accurate and better left-footed crosses than a right-footed left wing. But if you play with inverted wingers, then maybe you don't want to get to the end line. It's not as important. But that is one, I think, interesting example that would have been unique to you in your development. You probably played on the left side almost the entire time because of the fact that you were left-footed.
Yeah, I think I can probably count a handful of times going off the right, but it was with the sole purpose of being able to cut in and strike a ball with my left foot on frame. I was a fast left-footed player. I was obviously going to play in the back, in my opinion. Looking back now, like I hated it when it happened. I was like, I can't play in the back. I know nothing about the back. I was called a pretender defender in film in college, and I'll never forget it. I was like, I've been playing this position for like 3 days.
That's a funny comment as well, because, let's talk about defenders, because very few parents, put yourself on the 8-year-old sideline, the 10-year-old sideline. Very few parents are like, I'm so happy my kid is playing left back or center back, because again, wrongly, they all think, well, they need to be center forward or center midfielder. But ironically, the younger you are, the players in the back actually get the ball a heck of a lot more than the players up front most of the time in youth soccer, especially if you're trying to build out, right? So the backs will actually touch the ball a lot more than the forward at a 7v7 average U8 game. But then you have this perception of, well, if my kid's in the back, well, they must not be good enough to be in the front.
Yeah.
And you look and say, some of the best players in all of soccer history are outside backs who are there so that they can go forward. They're actually not there to defend predominantly. They have to do some of that, but they're there to attack from deeper spaces and to get up the line.
And I think that's why so many wingers are converted, is because you naturally then have the mentality of wanting to attack. So you're just going to bomb forward the entire game, which is why so many coaches convert players.
I think the key here is, to me, one part for coaches and one part for parents is, one, as a coach, you should have these profiles and be able to articulate them. And then to that point, two is you should communicate. I look at this as there are stakeholders in the game. And at the youth level, the stakeholders are the coach, the players, and the parents. Whether you like that or you don't like it is immaterial. The parents are part of the process, and they're an important part of the process. And so I find that the more you communicate what you're doing and why you're doing it, the more support you have for doing it. So in the example of Ashley, if I have an idea of what I want my left back to do, and I think Ashley does it well and can really excel at it and be a very high level player, then I explain to her what I think what is required for that. Those are the profiles and what I see in her. And then I get the other stakeholder, who is the parents, and I say, here's what I see and why I think it would be good for her to do this. Part of our challenge is, as coaches in the youth game, sometimes maybe we think we don't have to communicate with parents, that parents are better to be, as I heard when I was a child, better to be seen and not heard. But maybe it's the opposite. Maybe the more you inform that stakeholder, then maybe that alleviates some of the things that you're talking about, Christian, where people say, well, why am I playing left back? Why is she only playing left back or whatever?
Yeah, I think everybody feels better and is more likely to be bought in if they think there's a plan, or they know the plan, or that there's a reason for it. I go back to now tie this back to the playing different positions at certain ages, because again, go to profiles. If you're playing in the back, generally you're going to receive the ball facing forward. There's not a lot of times that a center back receives a ball back to goal and has to turn under pressure. If you are playing in midfield, you receive the ball from 360 degrees and you have to be able to play in 360 degrees. Those are very different perceptual skills, technical skills, decision-making skills. And so ultimately, that's one of the reasons why you can say a similar thing in a wide space. You know, we're speaking in generalities here, of course, but generally there's more space in the wide areas than there is in the middle of the field. So if you play wide your entire career, you face less constraints on average of receiving in tight spaces, because there's generally going to be more spaces. There's also more ability to use physical attributes like speed in the wide space than there is in the central space on average, right? So having a player, even if you look at a player and say, listen, they have the profile I see more and more clearly over time of a wide player, there may be, if you're thinking long-term, value to putting that player into a central space every now and then to force them to learn some of those skills or get better at some of those things that are not so prevalent at a wide space, but are still going to be helpful periodically. Does that make sense?
But can't you solve that in your training environment?
If you're intentional.
I think that's my point, is I don't necessarily agree that we have to manufacture experiences by playing people in a different position if we're in
if your training environment
is,
if your training environment is integrated that way. I would agree with that. I kind of look at it this way early on, and let's take away the very, very youngest ages, because I just think it's really hard. At those ages, it's about ball manipulation, basic understanding of 1v1 and space and You kill space defensively, you make space in attack, that sort of stuff. But the first step, I think, in looking at profiles of long term, because I think we're always trying to figure out where is this player best now, where are they going to be best long term, is looking at they're either sort of attacking minded or defensive minded, and they're either more central type players or more wide type players. I don't look at it as like right back versus right wing. I say it's sort of you're a wide-ish type player for the physical profile, the technical profile, and then you may have more inclinations to go forward and more to defend. And then as the player continues to grow and develop, that may change, but it also may become now you become more clearly a wide player in the attacking space, whether that's a right wing or a right midfielder or whatever it may be. That's how I kind of look at the evolution of a position
And
specialization.
where's the line of delineation on age that we're making? Because you said the really young ages. So let's define where those lines are.
I'll push back on that to something you've said in other podcasts is it's very, very individual because some of the kids are going to be more mentally and emotionally mature. They're going to be more technically developed earlier than others. But I think that's kind of your point is as the player shows more of who they are, it's easier to decide where is the profile that this player is going to be. I mean, go all the way back to the beginning. A player on day one who's never kicked a soccer ball before, we don't know anything about. Right now, as the player starts to show they're very good in this area, they're average in this area, they're weak in other areas, whether that's physically or technically or an understanding, that sort of starts to allow you to pivot your intervention with that player and positions that you put that player in. It's a good non-answer.
Yeah, it was a non-answer. I'm going to use a really horrible example. So I'll apologize ahead of time. This is a horrible example. But let's say you go and and you watch Barcelona's U10s play. Okay. What's that going to look like?
Very different than U10s in most of the Americas.
Okay. That is accurate. I don't want to compare, but they still are 9-year-olds or 10-year-olds, right?
And by the way, I think we both have seen Barcelona's U10s at one point.
Yes. And what I'll say is let's not underestimate what we could do if we were intentional about it. Now, Barcelona has the pick of a lot of the best players and that kind of stuff. But I think sometimes, and again, this is going down another road, you can agree or disagree. I think sometimes we underestimate what we can do with young players.
I would definitely agree with that. And actually, the first time I saw Barcelona's U8s and U10s play, I was astounded by the quality.
Astounded.
Yeah,
Yes.
I mean, it was just, and I think, by the way, this country's got a lot better. But if we went over and watched Barcelona's U10s today, we'd probably still be saying, wow, there's still a giant gap. But I think that also highlights the fact that, again, it's individual. Players that are more mature and developed are ready to do things that players that are not ready to do in terms of expectation, in terms of maybe even position specific. If you add, because I know people like bright lines, by age 13, 14, I think you need to be very clearly in a position where you're generally a wide player or a center player. You're generally more defensive or attacking. So, for example, I would look at most U13, U14, and let's say you're starting at right back on this day. I would like to think a 13-year-old who's playing right back on this game would be able to play right midfield pretty effectively, would be able to be a right-sided center back fairly effectively, could go into a center midfield maybe for a pinch. But you're moving around. You're not going from right back to left wing to number 9. You're kind of in a core couple of positions.
13 and 14.
I think that's when it starts. Now, again, somebody can change dramatically, but if you're 13 and 14 and I can't figure out where to play you at all, then I would wonder whether there's some serious development issues of like, I can't figure out where to play you because you don't fit any profile, because you don't have strengths that are clear enough in any of these areas. I mean, Ashley, you're laughing, but tell me what you think.
It's completely fair. But you're saying that at 13, 14, it's more of like right back, right side center back, right wing, maybe the 6 instead of being like outside players and like central players? You think at 13, 14, that's kind of lays out better?
No, kind of, but I guess I look at it and say, in football, they say it's blocking and tackling, right? And in soccer, it's passing and receiving. Where you're going to receive in a slightly different body orientation in a slightly different part of the field, with slightly different positional relationships around you in each one of those positions, but it's not night and day, right? So receiving as a right back versus receiving as a 9, that's night and day. Receiving as a right back versus receiving as a right winger or receiving as a right midfielder in a diamond, there are variations on a theme for sure. But I just look to start to say all of those build on each other in learning. If you play right back and then you play right midfield, well, right midfield, you're going to receive the ball and have to turn more under pressure than you are at right back. That's probably good for you as a right-sided player.
Right.
So again, we're speaking.
I think that you again underestimate the age in which you can start doing that, what you're talking about. I think it has to be younger. I'm not saying there are no players at 13 and 14 that will be kind of in the gray area some way, because we're all limited by the pool of players that we have. Probably we get new players, we lose kids decide to go play volleyball. I don't know. I think you're underestimating the time when you can start to do that.
I will agree with you with the caveat that the more developed the player is, the earlier you can do these types of things.
Or the earlier you develop them to start to do these kinds of things, the more they're going to be able to do these kinds of things.
So now we're going
Just
chicken
saying.
and the egg.
I guess.
Chicken and the egg.
I guess.
But, Ashley, what do you think?
No, I agree. I guess I just look at it.
She's rethinking her whole coaching philosophy right now.
No, I'm thinking about how many parents are about to come for my head, depending upon how I answer. I look at it a little bit different. I think like a 6, 8, and 10 can usually all play a 6, 8, or a 10. Outside backs
might be better at one than the other, by the way, but they can generally play all of them.
Center backs can probably figure out a 6 pretty easily. I don't think they're playing on the wing anytime soon.
Agree with that.
7-11s can probably figure out a 9. 9 can probably figure out a 7-11, but it's not going to be the prettiest thing. 9 and 10 kind of interchanging. But like an outside back is not going to go be a world beater at a 10, in my opinion. And I feel like Doug's about to come from.
I totally agree with you. Everything you said, yes, sir.
Yeah, no, listen, I think there's a lot of reality to what you're saying. But I wish we would not live in that and use that as an excuse or a crutch to not put forth a plan that prepares players to be really good at what they're doing. We can push ourselves in the way we think about the game and how we teach the game and when we can teach the game a little bit more idealistically, especially when the kids are younger. I will agree with you that there are some real realities to what we do and when the kids come and go and all that. If we had a plan that we can really articulate and that we really consider in a very idealistic way, because I think when you're dealing with young players, that's the way you should look at it. I think you should ask yourself, what do I want this to look like when I'm done or along the way? And that's the way I think you should approach it. And then we deal with the realities that are there for us. But I think if we put a plan together and that plan was very idealistic based on how we think what the profiles of players are and how we want to play the game, we probably would be a lot better in development if we did it that way, instead of leaning on the realities and not thinking idealistically.
Well, let's add one piece to that, because I'll take that and I'll say that I think every player should have a position that you feel like is going to be their best position. And it may be not by much over a different position, and it may be clearly this is your best position. But the other reality, if we want to talk about that, a lot of players end up changing that position based on the level of play.
Mhm.
Now, you normally don't move up the field. Okay. You don't normally go from center back at a lower level to center midfielder at a higher level,
Right.
but you do move back down the field. So you might be a winger at one level, you go to a higher level and you're an outside back. And the reality is that's because there's somebody who's better than you in the attacking phase of the game. That's why you move back. But I think that's also incumbent on players, coaches, parents, is that while you may say, this is where I think I am best, you need to also have the tools and the mental flexibility to play in a different position, or you are putting an artificial cap on your own career.
Those are the realities as you get towards the end of the youth soccer road. Or to your point, you leave a level and you step up a level. Those are realities. Totally agree with you.
I mean, you see this a lot, right? I mean, put this in context. You got kids, I think we all could say, have names come to your mind right now. You have a kid who joins the ECNL and they used to score a lot of goals at whatever level was not the ECNL. And then they come to the ECNL and they're not scoring goals. And the reality is that they may not ever be scoring a lot of goals anymore at this level, because what made them successful in that endeavor at a lower level, they're just not going to be able to do because the demands are so much higher. Maybe some of them they will eventually be able to as their game catches up to the level. But I think that's also, that player who is good enough to step up a level needs to be flexible enough to know that stepping up a level may mean a different profile for them. They need to be determined enough to know that stepping up a level means you're probably going to have to improve a lot of different things. And the coaches also have to, and parents have to understand that, because you do see a lot of people is, hey, I used to score goals all the time. Now I'm not. It must be something. Well, yeah, the something is the levels higher, and it's going to be harder for you to do that. And maybe, especially as you get older, maybe you're not going to be able to do what you did at the previous level at this level, and you need to understand that.
No question about it. I think that's later in the process. Probably. You guys would agree with that? Would you agree that a lot of the how to stuff happens earlier, and then you get to a point where, obviously you're older and you're in that kind of, we talk about that performance phase, right? And it's not that you're not learning or getting better, understanding things tactically, but the how-to is in a little bit in the rear view mirror, right? The passing and receiving.
I'll take another one that I'll take your side on, and let's use, again, generally, if generally club soccer is a higher level than high school soccer, okay, and you're a junior and you are a right winger in club soccer, because that's where you fit and that's where people see you fitting as you go older. Going into high school and playing center midfield, does that make you better long term? Or would be playing right winger at a higher level make you better long term?
B, but there are factors involved that we could talk about because there's nuance to it.
I would generally lean with B as well, because I think what happens as you get older, by the way, is that you go in and do things that you are able to do at lower levels that you are not able to do at the level that you're expecting to play on. And it doesn't help you get better at the things that you need to be really good at your position that you're playing at a higher level. Ashley, you look very contemplative on that.
Oh no, I'm just imagining myself having to play the 6 and it's stressing me out. I would be so bad as a 6. But no, that was just my own thought process. I agree with that. I would agree with you guys.
Depends on the level you'd be playing at, Ashley. There's a level out there where you'd be fine at the 6.
Oh yeah, I'm just thinking in general, laughing at myself, thinking playing a 6 ever or a 10. I'd be like, oh god. A lower level, I'd be high school, I'd be completely fine. But as a club player or a college player, oh god.
Well, this is the nuances of development, right? Because if you're a high level wide player, that's usually because you're great 1v1, you got some pace to you. Maybe your first touch isn't the tightest and cleanest, your ability to wiggle around in the middle.
I had a great touch.
Okay. Well, generally, if we had to be speaking generally, the players in the middle of the field are going to be a little tighter.
Lionel Messi left.
I know. They're gonna be better in these tight spaces of twisting and turning and connecting. But going into that position isn't necessarily going to make you better for when you get back out into a wide position when the level is lower. So just because you can,
Right.
because the level is
Doesn't mean you
lower,
should.
doesn't mean you should. And I think that's really, really misunderstood to some level. The higher the level you go, the more the demands are to do it faster and cleaner, right? Faster and cleaner, faster and cleaner. Decision, execution, action.
And
faster
how do
cleaner.
you do it faster and cleaner?
By doing it more.
That's right.
And context.
Correct. And so I think that's my point as well about this position specialization argument that we're not argument, but debate we're having. I think the main thing I would want to say is that at the young ages, don't underestimate what you can do with players and be idealistic about what you're doing with them, because it's a blank canvas, right?
I would agree with that. And I would add at the older ages, become really, really good at one position with the flexibility to do other things if needed, if required, if adjusting to get on the field means playing a different position, but become an expert in a position. But not the expert who says, I don't play anywhere else, because that expert tends to not be an expert by default.
It is so nuanced and so open to, I mean, there's no one size fits all in all this. In my early years, I grew up and I played basketball a lot and soccer. And when I got into coaching, I had an opportunity to get into coaching basketball or coaching soccer. And I chose soccer. And one of the reasons I chose it is because of how gray it is and how much we can look at it so differently and how many different decisions can be made with a good outcome in any one single moment. So, but all these things are nuanced. Hopefully, if you're a parent and you're listening to this, your kid is being coached by somebody who has a plan and an idea of what they're trying to do for long-term development, and they communicate it to you and you buy it. If you're a coach and you're listening to this, have a plan.
And tweak the plan, because the plan, no plan survives first contact.
Sure. And communicate what you're doing. And whether you like it or not, parents are stakeholders. It's a fact. So don't fight it.
This has probably been the most soccer theory or developmental theory we've had in a podcast in a long time. Theory might be a little bit of ambitious word. We'll see. We'll see what the response is. Reed is sitting here not being a soccer player, not sure what his response is, but he's going to get in on the Bracken Brain Buster.
Yeah. And I'll just add to this, Christian, these are our opinions. You know, we've all kind of been doing this for a while. These are our opinions. It's not the ECNL telling you this is what you should do. If you want to yell about it, then I'm going to say, okay, man. Yeah. Whatever you want. Yeah. So, okay.
It depends. It depends, Doug. Everything depends.
Yeah, everything depends.
One final break, and then indeed we will go to Doug Bracken and Bracken's Brainbuster. That comes after this message from an ECNL corporate partner.
From athletes just starting to turn heads to some of the best athletes to ever play their games, Gatorade shows that they are the proven fuel of the best. For the athletes who give everything, nothing beats Gatorade, the studied, tested, and proven fuel of the ECNL.
Welcome back to the third and final segment of Breaking the Line, the ECNL podcast, where we feature Doug Bracken and the Bracken Brainbuster. And Christian asked Doug right away, who's going to go first?
Are we going to put Reed first? Is he going to be on the hot seat right away?
I think so. He's a young guy. He's just starting out in his life as an adult. And so
Reed, you going to take that? I mean, you just graduated, but I don't know if he's just starting out as an adult. Reed, what you got to say about that?
I'd say that's a valid statement. I mean, I'm figuring my way out through life.
All right, you're adulting for the first time.
Yes. So Reed probably has less to offer on this particular question, but I'm going to ask.
Show him wrong.
I'm going to ask
Show
it.
him
I know
wrong,
Christian is going to hate this question, so this is why I'm doing it. Reed, what is the best pair of shoes you have in your closet?
Oh my gosh.
Call them out. Best pair of shoes.
Sponsored by Nike.
I want to say it's the Nike Pegasus Turbos, specifically the black and white. I cannot say enough good things about them. Clean look, comfortable. Because again, like as a videographer, I guess we're all like, out at these events or just like in everyday life. Like I'll look at my watch at the end of the day. Like sometimes I'll have like almost 20,000 steps and I never have sore feet. Like, yeah.
This is like a regular advertisement right here.
I'm going to tell you this right now. Reed over delivered right there. He was very sure himself. He had his facts and his reasoning behind it. Respect.
Well played, Reed. Well played.
Well played. We give you.
Thank you. Can't say enough good things about him. Would 10 out of 10 recommend.
Are those the shoes that you passed your walking class in college?
Yes, it is.
Great.
You had a walking class?
Online walking. I did. That is not made up.
Online walking.
Wow.
Even
All
better.
right, I'm going to leave that one alone
Let's
right there.
for a future podcast. I always do this to Ashley when somebody
I
gives
can't imagine why the college degree value is changing.
online walking. Ashley loves it when somebody gives a really good answer and then I make her go next. So I'm going to go with Ashley.
Probably my Nike Vaporflies, the running shoes. They're so comfortable to run in. So I would just say those. Keep it simple.
So Ashley flexing that she runs.
I mean,
trying to one up Reed, who walks. Pretty savage thing to do on Reed's first podcast.
okay, he can handle it.
Ray, did you have an online running class too, or was that like not?
No, I'm not advanced enough for that. So
All right,
For graduate students only. He only did undergrad.
yeah, you got to take walking as a prereq.
Well played. All right, Labors. As much as I've tried,
I'm not a shoe guy, you know that. If you were answering for me, you'd say, "Hey, man, you got a pair of Travis Scott's."
no, I would. The shoes I've always seen you the most in is those 270s.
See, I don't even. Oh, the 270s. I do like the 270s. That's what I'm going to go with. I got a white pair and a black pair. I like the 270s.
Okay.
That's it. I'm gonna stop talking because I don't even know the names of the other ones.
So Nike 270s. That's Christian. Okay. I'm pretty deep in the shoes. It's actually embarrassing, but 100% Jordan 3s. Best ever. Super comfortable. Very stylish. Lots of colorways. So I'm going to go Jordan 3s. I particularly like the elephant print Jordan 3s, but those only come out for special occasions. Got to keep them crispy. And then I guess last but not least, it's probably Dean's wife's got a pair of shoes that he really likes. So that's what he's going to say. So
Dean's going to say like Florsheim. Something
that's
like
right.
That.
That's right.
Or penny
So,
loafer.
Dean, best pair of shoes in your closet, my friend.
Since the barbs are flying, I will fire one back and say that this is the worst Bracken's Brain Buster we've had so far. I think of shoes the way I think of pens, where I really put no value on them. But to answer the question, which is required, it's sandals on Bald Head Island. That's simple. All the other shoes could care less. Sandals on Bald Head Island.
All right. Well, that is a wide-ranging discussion on positions and development and profiling, and we'll see what people think about it. If this one hits hard like the last one did, then I think the answer that we need to get into is like whatever people are complaining about on the sidelines and talking about on the sidelines and criticizing coaches on the sidelines. That's what we need to talk about. If this one bombs, then we know that we got into the weeds.
So let us hear from you. Let us know what you're thinking of Breaking the Line, the ECNL podcast, this topic, other topics, and so much more. I want to thank Christian, Ashley, Doug, and Reed for each and every one of them, and all of you, as well as my producer, Colin Thrash. I'm Dean Linke. We'll see you in 2 weeks for another edition of Breaking the Line, the ECNL podcast. Thank you for listening to Breaking the Line, the ECNL podcast. And remember, if you have a question that you want answered on Breaking the Line, the ECNL podcast, email us at info@theecnl.com.